Welcome to CRJ 112, Introduction to Criminology. This is Chapter 2, where we're going to taking a brief look at the nature and extent of crime. And really, Chapter 2 reviews how data is collected on criminal offenders and offenses, and then what that information can tell us about different crime patterns and trends. We're also going to look at the concept of criminal careers, chronicity, or chronic offenders, and then we're going to discover what available crime data can tell us about the onset, continuation, and termination of criminality. Now, understanding how people gather information on delinquency is really the central focus of the first part of the chapter. Now, do you know how this information is gathered? Well, there's three basic primary sources of data: official records, victim surveys, and self-report surveys. Now, one of the main sources of official records is the FBI's UCR, or Uniform Crime Report. And they compile information on crimes such as homicide, forcible rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, arson, and motor vehicle theft. And those are called Part 1 offenses. Now, they also compile information on other criminal offenses that are known as Part 2 crimes, and those are drug offenses, status offenses, and other crimes. Now, law enforcement agencies report Part 1 crimes on a monthly basis, and the number of actual known offenses is reported even if there's not an arrest made or the person's not prosecuted. Now, there are three primary ways to express crime data. The first is the number of crimes reported to the police and then arrests made. So, for example, one could say in 2008 there were 16,272 murders in the United States. The second way is to look at crime rates per 100,000 people. So, example, you would say that the murder rate in 2008 was 5.4 per 100,000. And then the last way is to talk about a change in the number and the rate of crime over time. For example, you might say that the murder rate decreased by 4.7% between 2007 and 2008. Now, some of the problems concerning the validity of the UCR statistics are kind of related to underreporting on the part of victims. And actually, it's believed that less than one-half of all crimes are even reported to the police. Another criticism is that there's a lack of consistency in how law enforcement agencies report crime. Some define crimes very loosely, while others adhere to the guidelines given by the FBI. Regardless, the UCR continues to be one of the most widely used sources of official crime statistics. Now, when we talk about victim information, the National Crime Victimization Survey indicates that victims often do not report crimes, like we just mentioned. Why do you think there is this discrepancy between crime reports to the police and then what we find from the NCBS? Now, maybe some of it's due to embarrassment, or they believe that nothing can be done, so what's the point in reporting it? But either way, it's important to remember that victim surveys do indicate that the crime problem may be larger than what official data actually indicates. Now, there are some issues with the NCBS. There is the possibility of over-reporting due to the victim's misinterpretation of events, or it could be under-reporting due to embarrassment, fear, or simply forgetting the event. Now, another source are self-report surveys, but you have to consider that expecting people to admit their involvement in an illegal activity is probably a little bit unrealistic and unreasonable. In addition, some people may actually exaggerate, forget, or be confused about the nature of the criminal acts. Now, when we look at crime trends, we see that since 1990, crime has been in steady decline. In fact, violent crime has dropped by almost 40% since 1991. We've also seen a reduction in property crime rates by about 10% in the last decade. Now, data from both the UCR and the NCBS seem to support the notion that crime in general is going down and has stayed down over the last decade or so. Now, one of the last parts of the chapter takes a look at different crime patterns and how they can be linked to different factors, such as temporal and ecological factors, regional differences in crime, differences based on social class and socioeconomic conditions. And we see that crime does tend to be a lower class phenomenon. We also look at age. Typically, people age out of crime. As they get older, they commit less crime. There are gender differences that could be attributed to differences in traits, socialization, and different cognitive differences. And then finally, look at racial differences. And some people believe that there's an actual racial bias that's reflected in the number of minorities that are arrested. The last part of the chapter talks about the chronic offender. Now, most people commit a single crime and then they stop that behavior, but there are some that continue to commit crime throughout their lifetime. Those people account for the majority of all criminal offenses. So I guess the question is, what causes someone to engage in a life of crime? Well, if you look on page 55 of the textbook in Exhibit 2.3, you'll see that there are several factors there that lead or could contribute to chronicity. Now, the concept of the chronic offender has caused criminologists to ask the question, do some people possess an individual trait that is responsible for their behavior? The chronic offender has also become a central focus of crime control policy. It appears that apprehension and punishment have little effect on chronic offenders, so the goals of sentencing policies of recent times really have shifted from rehabilitation to incapacitation. Now we see this, examples of this would be the 3 strikes and you're outlaws, and the truth in sentencing policies. Now next week we're going to take a look at Chapter 3, which explores victims and victimization. And we're really going to look at what impact does victimization have on society, what's the nature of victimization, what are different theories of victimization, and how does the criminal justice system going about taking care of the victim.